I'm Ashley Gray, 38 years old, and I live a life that, on the surface, looks like a carefully balanced tightrope act, juggling a demanding career with a family that's anything but simple. By day, I'm a financial analyst. Numbers and spreadsheets are my world. I've spent the last 15 years mastering the art of corporate finance and risk management, diving deep into budgets, forecasts, and strategies that help companies thrive. It's a career that demands precision, patience, and sometimes a bit of ruthless pragmatism. But at home, the challenges aren't about profit margins or market trends. They're about people, emotions, and the tangled web of family ties that can't be managed by logic alone. When people ask me what I do in the family, my answer is simple. I'm the go-to person for money matters. If there's a bill to be paid, a budget to be worked out, or some financial crisis swirling around the corner, it usually falls on my shoulders. I've always been the one who quietly steps in to cover the costs, sometimes for small emergencies, sometimes for big events. I organize, I fund, I fix, and I do it without complaint, because that's what family does, right? Or so I thought. My reliability has become a double-edged sword. While I'm the backbone of many family operations, keeping things afloat when others falter, that same reliability has bred a simmering tension beneath the surface. It's a strange place to be, valued for what I can provide financially, but never quite embraced as a full, welcomed participant. I've lost count of the times I've sent money for a family gathering, only to receive barely a nod of acknowledgement. The family party is always ours, but I'm increasingly realizing that for some, I'm more an invisible fixture than a cherished relative. The latest family party illustrates this better than any words could. I had painstakingly coordinated the entire event: venue, catering, decorations, the works. I handled every invoice, every payment, every logistical nightmare that comes with assembling a group of people who are, frankly, not the easiest to please. I did it all because I wanted to bring us together, to build bridges where they'd been broken, to create memories that might heal old wounds. I didn't expect a parade of thanks. I just hoped for a little warmth, a little welcome. Instead, I got a blow I wasn't prepared for. Midway through the evening, my mother, Margaret, the matriarch of our family, pulled me aside, her voice low but sharp. "You're not welcome here," she said. The words hit me like a slap in the face, cold and absolute. She didn't mince words or soften the blow with excuses. It was a sentence that cut through years of effort, hope, and silent sacrifice. I stood there, stunned, a cocktail of shock, hurt, and disbelief swirling inside me. I managed to keep my composure, not wanting to cause a scene in front of everyone, but inside, a storm was brewing. That moment marked something new, a fracture in the family's story that I could no longer ignore or smooth over. It was as if the very foundation of my role in this family had shifted beneath me, exposing fault lines I'd been too busy to see before. The party continued around us, laughter and chatter filling the room, but for me, time seemed to freeze. As I stepped back into the crowd, I realized that this wasn't just about a single event, or a single cruel sentence. It was about years of being sidelined, undervalued, and dismissed. Years I had tried to bridge with generosity and quiet support. The fact that the party I funded could be used as the stage for my exclusion was a bitter irony I couldn't shake. My mind raced through memories, conversations, and unspoken family dynamics that had led to this point. The realization settled heavily. I wasn't just facing rejection, I was facing a calculated dismissal of everything I'd done. That night, as the party carried on without me at its heart, I felt something shift inside me, a mix of sorrow and a strange clarity. I was no longer just the family's unpaid accountant or its silent benefactor. Something had changed, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't just pretend everything was fine anymore. The delicate balancing act I'd maintained was about to face a reckoning, and I wasn't sure what the fallout would look like. But one thing was certain. This moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, one written on my terms, not theirs. Growing up in the Gray family, the lines of affection and acceptance were drawn early, and they were never drawn in my favor. I've replayed countless memories, trying to understand when exactly the exclusion began, hoping for a moment or reason that could explain why my place in the family always felt so precarious. The truth is, it started as far back as I can remember, etched into the very foundation of our family dynamics by my mother, Margaret. Margaret, in her authoritative way, had always made it clear that Brian, my younger brother, was the favored child. From the way she lavished him with praise to the decisions she made about who got to go where and do what, it was obvious. Brian had a magnetic charm that everyone seemed to fall for, and Margaret embraced that completely. She saw in him the reflection of her own ambitions, a son who could shine socially and professionally without the laborious effort she believed I put in. Meanwhile, my contributions, quiet, steady, and practical, were overlooked or dismissed as unremarkable. It wasn't just Margaret's partiality. It extended to Lisa, Brian's wife. Lisa embodied the social ideals Margaret admired: polished, influential, and always impeccably connected. From early on, Lisa seemed to instinctively mirror Margaret's favoritism, creating an unspoken alliance that left me on the outside. At family gatherings, while they exchanged knowing smiles and inside jokes, I was often relegated to the periphery, both physically and emotionally. It was a subtle but unmistakable pattern of exclusion, one that whispered, "You matter less." Over the years, this dynamic grew more entrenched. I was branded the responsible but invisible sibling, a label that felt like a double bind. On one hand, I was expected to be the dependable one, the organizer, the crisis manager, the one who would quietly cover expenses when others ran short. I was the safety net, always there to catch the family when they stumbled financially or emotionally. But on the other hand, that very reliability became my erasure. Being responsible meant my needs, my presence, my contributions weren't celebrated. They were taken for granted. The pattern wasn't just about being overlooked at parties or family events. It went deeper, into the everyday decisions and moments that shaped our relationships. I remember the family vacations where I was either excluded or expected to pay my own way entirely, while Brian and Lisa were gifted trips or had their expenses covered without a second thought. Invitations to important celebrations were often extended to others before me, if at all. When financial emergencies arose, I was the one who was quietly asked for help. Yet when I needed support, the calls went unanswered or were met with excuses. Often, I convinced myself this was just family quirks, that it was the way things were in every household. Favoritism, sibling rivalry, a mother's difficult love. I clung to hope that as I grew older, as I proved my loyalty and contributions, things would shift. Maybe they'd see me. Maybe they'd acknowledge the sacrifices, the late nights spent managing budgets, the unexpected loans that kept Brian's failing business afloat. But those hopes dimmed with every slight and dismissal. It became clearer with time that my role was predefined and unchangeable. I was the family's invisible pillar, supporting from the shadows, but never invited into the spotlight. The emotional labor I poured in was met with silence. My financial generosity was met with entitlement. I was the one who paid the bills but never got a thank you that felt sincere. And when attempts to assert myself or seek recognition arose, they were met with coldness or deflection. Looking back, the seeds of exclusion weren't sown overnight. They were cultivated through countless small acts: a glance ignored, a compliment withheld, a door quietly closed. It was a slow erosion of belonging that left me feeling isolated in a family that should have been my refuge. That history of sidelining, of being valued only for what I could provide and never for who I was, is the backdrop to the moment at the party when my mother told me I wasn't welcome. It was the culmination of years of unspoken rejection, made explicit in the most devastating way. As I sit with these memories, the pain is still raw, but so is the clarity. I realize now that the family quirks I excused for so long were symptoms of a deeper dysfunction, a refusal to truly see me, to honor my worth beyond the ledger of debts and expenses. The favoritism that once felt like a family eccentricity is the root of my invisibility. And that realization, painful as it is the first step toward reclaiming my place, not as the invisible sibling, but as someone who deserves to be seen and respected on her own terms. When I look back at all I've done for my family, the sacrifices pile up like an unpaid tab on a long, exhausting night. I've funded multiple family parties over the years, sometimes quietly covering costs that were never fully communicated, other times stepping in when others hesitated or outright refused. Each event was a logistical and financial puzzle: booking venues, arranging catering menus, managing guest lists, and paying invoices that could easily run into the thousands. I'd often cover the deposit myself, knowing the rest would trickle in from siblings who always seemed to find a way to delay or dodge their share. It became my unspoken responsibility, the financial fixer no one thanked but everyone relied on. The weight of those bills sat heavily on my shoulders, but I told myself it was worth it, for the family, for the memories, for the chance to keep us connected. Beyond parties, my support extended into the more painful and personal realms of our family's struggles. When my aging relatives faced medical bills that no one else seemed prepared to confront, I quietly stepped in. I covered expenses for treatments, prescriptions, even emergency hospital visits. Those sudden, terrifying moments that shake you to your core. I remember nights sitting alone, reviewing invoices and payment plans, calculating interest rates and due dates, trying to make sense of insurance jargon as I balanced it against my own budget. I never broadcasted these acts. They were private, because asking for recognition felt like betraying the humility the family expected from me. But I was always there, the silent guardian of their health and financial stability. And then there were the personal sacrifices, those moments I would rather forget, but that accumulate quietly, shaping who you are. I skipped vacations, not once or twice, but repeatedly. While friends planned getaways and couples escaped for weekends, I stayed behind, redirecting funds toward family emergencies or helping my brother Brian cover expenses he couldn't manage himself. I remember canceling a trip I'd long dreamed about, the chance to finally breathe, to step out of the constant family revolving door, and instead, using that money to cover a last-minute repair on the family car, or contribute toward Lisa's extravagant birthday party, which, ironically, I never felt truly part of. Brian's business, in particular, became a financial sinkhole I tried desperately to support. When he started his small company, I lent him money, not once, but more than once, believing that a little help could turn things around for him. I managed spreadsheets for his cash flow, suggested budget cuts, and even negotiated with suppliers on his behalf. My husband David warned me to tread carefully, reminding me that family money could complicate relationships. But I held on to hope that Brian would succeed, that the family would recognize my investment not just financially, but emotionally. Instead, those loans became quiet debts in conversations never had, favors never returned. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the constant mental load, tracking who owed what, sending reminders, absorbing the sting when payments were late or forgotten. I was the family's unofficial accountant, but without the title or the respect. I juggled this with my demanding career, often working late into the night to make the numbers add up, both at the office and at home. And yet, the recognition I hoped for never came. Gratitude was scarce. Entitlement was pervasive. David, my husband, was my voice of reason amid the turmoil. He saw the strain and gently urged me to set limits, to protect my own peace. "Ashley," he'd say, "you're not their bank. You can't keep covering for everyone." His words were both a comfort and a challenge. I wanted to believe that my generosity was building bridges, that my family's gratitude was just waiting beneath the surface. But with each unpaid bill and every invisible gesture, that faith frayed. Still, I clung to the hope that someday, all this invisible labor, every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice, would be seen for what it was, an act of love and loyalty. I believed that if I just kept showing up, kept supporting, kept funding, the family would finally acknowledge that I mattered, not just as a provider, but as a person. But deep down, I feared the truth, that my contributions were accepted but never truly valued. Like a fixture in the background, no one bothered to notice. Looking back now, with the sting of recent events fresh in my mind, I see that those sacrifices were more than generosity. They were a form of silent bargaining. Each party I funded, Each medical bill I paid, each vacation I forfeited was a silent plea for belonging, a hope wrapped in currency. And yet, the ledger of love and acceptance never balanced in my favor. Instead, I was left with a mounting debt of resentment and invisibility. That realization is what fuels the fire inside me now, a resolve that whatever happens next, I'm done being the family's invisible benefactor. The sacrifices I've made were never meant to erase me. They were meant to build a family that sees me. And if that family doesn't exist, then perhaps it's time I stop paying the price to be invisible. The holiday dinner should have been a moment of celebration, a chance for the family to come together, to share joy and warmth during the season when everyone's supposed to feel closest. But as with so many gatherings in the Gray family, it was a minefield of unspoken tensions, subtle slights, and the ever-present undercurrent of favoritism. I arrived hopeful, despite the familiar knots in my stomach, clutching the news of my recent promotion like a quiet victory. I wanted to share it with them, to finally shine in their eyes beyond the numbers I crunched or the bills I paid. The dining room was aglow with soft fairy lights, the scent of pine and cinnamon mingling with the rich aroma of roasted turkey and freshly baked pies. Laughter bubbled around the table, but beneath the surface, I knew the laughter didn't reach everyone equally. My mother, Margaret, sat at the head, commanding the room with her usual gravitas. Brian and Lisa were nestled comfortably on her right, exchanging knowing looks as if they shared a secret language that I wasn't privy to. I tried to catch my mother's eye as I took my seat, offering a tentative smile, but she barely spared me a glance. The air felt thick, as if my presence was an intrusion rather than a welcome addition to the gathering. Still, I pressed on, determined to share my news. When the conversation briefly shifted to work, I found my opening. "I got promoted," I said, my voice steady but laced with a hope I could barely articulate. "I'll be leading a new team next quarter." A few polite nods followed, but the tone quickly shifted. Lisa's lips curled into a patronizing smile as she interjected, loud enough for several to hear. "Well, Ashley, that's expected, isn't it? Given how cautious you are with money, it makes sense you'd move up the ladder slowly but surely." I paused, the words prickling like 1,000 tiny needles. The dismissal stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the backhanded compliment. It was the implication that my achievement was mundane, predictable, and unworthy of real praise. Margaret, not one to miss a chance to reinforce her preferences, chimed in from her seat. "Honestly, Ashley's promotion is nothing like Brian's. He inherited the family business, you know. That's real success, something that runs in our bloodline and can't be earned through cautious steps." Brian, ever the charmer, flashed a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, Ashley, you might be good with numbers, but some things just come naturally," he said smoothly, brushing off my accomplishment as if it were a minor footnote in his own story. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and something deeper, hurt. It was as if all the years of hard work, the late nights, the sacrifices, were being erased in a few careless sentences. The room seemed to shrink around me, the warmth of the holiday replaced by the cold glare of exclusion. Trying to reclaim some dignity, I responded quietly, "I'm proud of what I've done, and it's been through a lot of effort and perseverance." Lisa laughed softly, shaking her head. "Perseverance is one thing, but you really do overthink everything, Ashley. Sometimes you have to take risks, be bold. That's how real success happens, not by playing it safe all the time." Her words were sharp, wrapped in a veneer of advice, but dripping with condescension. I wanted to retort, to defend my approach, but the family's eyes were on me, some sympathetic, but many indifferent or amused. I swallowed my impulse, refusing to let the moment spiral into a confrontation that would only deepen the invisible wall between us. As the evening wore on, the conversation moved on, but the pattern was clear. Brian and Lisa dominated the dialogue, their stories and plans the center of attention. Margaret's laughter rang loudest when they spoke, her eyes shining with pride. Meanwhile, I was overlooked, my presence barely acknowledged, except when a financial question arose, an old script I was all too familiar with. Despite the sting, I tried to focus on the small kindnesses, the nods from distant cousins, the smile from my husband, David, who sat quietly beside me offering silent support. But the undercurrent of dismissal was impossible to ignore. The message was clear. My achievements were secondary, my voice a background note in the family's chorus. Driving home that night, the festive lights blurred through the car window, mirroring the swirl of emotions inside me. There was disappointment, yes, but also a dawning awareness. This was a pattern, not a one-off. My success wasn't just overlooked, it was actively minimized to elevate others. The holiday dinner was a stage, and I was cast in the role of the responsible but invisible sibling once again. In that moment, I realized that my desire for acceptance had led me to ignore the painful truth. This family didn't see me as an equal. They saw me as a support system, a financial cushion, but never as someone worthy of genuine respect or celebration. The promotion I had hoped would bridge the gap only widened it. I clenched my fists on the steering wheel, the realization settling like a stone in my chest. I had been trying to prove my worth through sacrifice and achievement, but the definition of worth in this family was skewed, rooted in favoritism, inherited privilege, and social dominance. As the miles passed beneath me, I knew I had a choice: continue seeking validation in a place that dismissed me, or begin to redefine what family meant on my own terms. The holiday dinner was just one scene in a much larger story, a story where I could no longer afford to be invisible. The day of the family party arrived with a tension I couldn't quite shake, though I tried to dismiss it beneath layers of busy preparation. I had poured weeks of careful planning into the event, booking the hall, selecting the caterers, arranging every detail down to the floral centerpieces and the playlist. Every invoice had passed through my hands, every payment meticulously tracked and covered, often out of my own pocket when family contributions lagged. This wasn't just any party. I had hoped it would be a turning point, a chance to stitch together the frayed edges of our family fabric. The venue was warm and inviting, filled with the hum of distant conversations and the clinking of glasses. As guests arrived, I scanned the room for familiar faces, eager to see some sign that my efforts had been appreciated. David was by my side, quietly supportive as always, but I noticed the subtle shifts, the way some family members eyed me with thinly veiled resentment or indifference, the polite but distant greetings that barely touched the surface of genuine warmth. Then, in the middle of the evening, the moment I dreaded came with a force I hadn't anticipated. Margaret approached me, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp and cold. She pulled me aside, away from the laughter and chatter, to a quieter corner of the room. The words she spoke were blunt, delivered without hesitation or sympathy. "You're not welcome here." The phrase hung in the air between us, heavier than any silence I had known before. "You're not welcome here." Not "please leave," not "we're upset with you," but a clear, irrevocable statement of exclusion. My breath caught. Time seemed to slow. I blinked, searching her face for some hint of jest, some flicker of doubt, but there was none. She was utterly serious. "You're not welcome here," she repeated, her voice steady. "It's for the family dynamics. You and your children. This isn't the place for you tonight." The words stabbed deeper when she mentioned my children. They were outside, happily playing with cousins, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly poisoned the air. To be told they were not welcome at a party I had funded was a blow that pierced my heart. I stood there, trying to maintain my composure, but inside, a storm raged. Confusion, hurt, disbelief, and an overwhelming surge of anger. All those years of support, all the times I had covered bills, organized gatherings, sacrificed personal plans, had led to this moment of utter rejection. It wasn't just a personal slight. It was a public declaration that my contributions were meaningless, that my place in the family was conditional and revocable. Around us, the party continued as if nothing had happened. Laughter echoed from the other side of the room. Glasses clinked. The music played softly. But for me, the festive atmosphere felt hollow, a cruel backdrop to a moment of raw exclusion. David saw the shock flicker across my face and touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his concern evident. I began, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain the sharp ache of being cast out from my own labor of love? How could I articulate the betrayal that cut deeper than any argument or disagreement? Margaret's gaze remained unwavering. This is for the best. You wouldn't understand the dynamics, but it's what the family needs. Her words implied I was an outsider, a disruptive force, rather than a member of the family. The irony was cruel. She wielded family as a weapon, excluding the very person who had kept its finances afloat. I forced a nod, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of witnessing my unraveling. So I stepped away silently, retreating back into the crowd, feeling the weight of invisible chains tightening around me. As I moved through the room, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, some avoiding my gaze, others whispering in hushed tones. I could feel the divide, the invisible barrier that had been concretely built in front of me. My children, still outside, played unaware. I wanted to gather them, to shield them from the sting of rejection, but I hesitated. Was I protecting them or denying them a connection they deserved? The stark reality settled in. This party, my party, had become a stage for my exclusion. The people I had spent years supporting had chosen to erase me in the very moment I tried to bring us together. I found a quiet corner and took a deep breath, the sting of tears threatening to spill. Everything I had done, the countless hours, the financial strain, the emotional labor, felt suddenly meaningless, reduced to nothing more than a backdrop for rejection. The cold finality of Margaret's words echoed in my mind. You're not welcome here. And yet, amid the hurt, a flicker of something else began to glow. A simmering resolve that this moment would not define me, that the story I had lived so far was about to change. But for now, all I could do was stand in the shadow of that rejection, feeling the fracture widen between what I had given and what was acknowledged. The family party went on, laughter and music filling the night air. But for me, the celebration had lost its meaning. The painful truth was clear. I was no longer simply invisible. I was unwelcome. That night, after the party had faded into the background and the last guests had reluctantly filed out, I sat alone in the quiet of our living room, the air thick with the weight of everything that had just happened. The house was dim, except for the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to stretch out like the lingering doubts and hurts inside me. I didn't cry immediately. Instead, I sat there, numb, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. My mother's words echoed relentlessly. You're not welcome here. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a verdict, a cold dismissal that stripped away every ounce of hope I'd clung to for years. That phrase wasn't just about the party. It was a rejection of me, of my place in this family. Slowly, the numbness gave way to a swirl of emotions: grief, anger, confusion. I felt betrayed, not just by her, but by the entire family system that had allowed this to happen. How had it come to this? How had years of sacrifice, support, and silent labor been repaid with such cruelty? My hands shook as I reached for my laptop, needing something tangible to anchor me amid the emotional storm. I opened a folder I'd kept meticulously updated over the years, a detailed archive of every invoice paid, every loan given, every emergency expense covered. The numbers stared back at me coldly, but they told a story far richer than dollars and cents. I scrolled through receipts for catered dinners, venue rentals, and floral arrangements for family gatherings that I had organized and funded, time and time again. There were hospital bills I'd quietly settled when relatives faced sudden surgeries or ongoing treatments. There were countless transfers to Brian's account, money lent to prop up his faltering business, loans made without contracts or expectations of repayment, simply because I wanted to help. Each document felt heavier than the last, a proof of my invisible labor. These numbers weren't just transactions. They were fragments of my life woven into the fabric of a family that had never acknowledged them. The financial support I provided had been the glue holding parts of our family together, yet it was treated as an entitlement, a given. But it wasn't only the money. The emotional labor had been just as draining. I thought about the countless times I'd mediated disputes, calmed tensions, and smoothed over misunderstandings. Roles I took on quietly, because I believed in preserving family unity. I remembered the evenings spent on the phone, listening to complaints or desperate pleas for help, all while managing my own exhaustion. I'd been the family's emotional firewall, absorbing their storms, never letting the cracks show. Now, that firewall felt breached. The grief was profound. The mourning of a family I thought I had, but realized I never truly did. I grieved for the recognition that never came, for the respect that was always withheld, for the countless times I'd put others first, hoping that one day my efforts would be seen and reciprocated. Anger simmered beneath the grief. How dare they dismiss me so bluntly? How could my mother, who had raised me, speak such cold words after all I'd done? The injustice burned like a fire in my chest, a stark contrast to the calm, composed woman I'd always tried to be. I felt the stirrings of a defiant strength rising within me, not the quiet support they were used to, but a fierce, determined force ready to reclaim my dignity. As I sat there, the contrast between my contributions and their disregard crystallized into a sharp clarity. The family had been exploiting my generosity all along. I was not valued as a person, only as a resource. My sacrifices were expected, my presence overlooked unless I was serving their needs. The mantra of family first suddenly sounded hollow, a phrase hollowed out by unequal love and conditional acceptance. I thought about David, his quiet support, his cautious warnings to protect myself, to set boundaries. He had seen the strain I was under, had urged me not to lose myself in the family's demands. His steady presence was a lifeline amid the chaos of my emotions. That night, as the shadows lengthened and the house grew still, I made a silent vow to myself. No longer would I allow my generosity to be taken for granted. No longer would I sacrifice my well-being to uphold a family that treated me as invisible, then rejected me outright. I realized that respect and belonging couldn't be bought with money or mended with endless patience. They had to be earned through mutual care, honesty, and accountability. This painful awakening was the beginning of something new, a turning point in how I would navigate the tangled, toxic web of my family. The grief and anger were the fuel for a transformation, a recalibration of my role and boundaries. I wasn't just the family's financial anchor anymore. I was a person demanding recognition and respect. The night stretched on, and with it came a quiet resolve that whatever I chose to do next, it would be on my terms. The ledger of debts owed to me, both financial and emotional, was now a record I would no longer carry alone. And somewhere beneath the grief and fire, a spark of hope flickered. The hope that reclaiming my dignity might lead to a life where I was truly welcome, not just tolerated. The morning after the party, as the sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long, unforgiving shadows across the kitchen table, I sat down with a heavy sigh. My laptop was open before me, folders spread out like a battlefield of evidence. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It was about cold, undeniable facts, a ledger of all the ways I'd kept this family afloat, financially and emotionally, while being disregarded and, ultimately, cast aside. I started by pulling up the spreadsheets I'd meticulously maintained over the years. Every family event, every emergency, every just this once payment was recorded with dates, amounts, and notes. I ran my fingers over the keyboard, feeling the familiar click of keys that usually brought clarity to my work life. But today, they underscored a painful truth. The first folder was labeled Family Events. Opening it revealed receipts and invoices from venues, caterers, and decorators. For the recent party alone, I had covered the $4,500 deposit to secure the hall, multiple catering payments totaling nearly $7,000, and last-minute charges for floral arrangements and a live DJ. I clicked through the emails where family members promised reimbursing me soon, but those promises rarely materialized. Brian's share had always been the biggest struggle. He either claimed he'd transfer money next week or simply ignored reminders altogether. Scrolling back through years, the pattern was clear. I was the one who took the financial hit when others hesitated. Birthdays, holidays, even small get-togethers. I'd footed the bill more times than I could count. The receipts piled up. $2,000 here, $3,500 there. I'd never asked for reimbursements aggressively. I told myself family was about support, not profit. But now, looking at this mountain of unpaid debts, I couldn't ignore the weight of it anymore. I moved to the medical expenses folder next. Here lay bills from hospital stays for my aging aunt, urgent surgeries for cousins, and ongoing prescription costs for my grandfather. Many of these had been emergencies or treatments no one else wanted to manage. I had become the family's silent insurer, quietly transferring funds to cover deductibles and copays, navigating insurance claims late into sleepless nights. I remembered chasing down paperwork while juggling my demanding job and caring for my own children. These weren't just numbers. They were sleepless nights, anxious phone calls, and emotional exhaustion. Then came the personal loans. Opening the folder marked Brian's business support felt like reopening a wound. I'd lent Brian over $15,000 in the past 5 years, loans made without contracts, without a formal agreement, simply because I believed in him and our family. I had managed spreadsheets tracking his cash flow, negotiated with suppliers on his behalf, and even advised on budgets. I could recall the quiet conversations with David warning me to tread carefully, but I'd pushed aside those cautions. I wanted to help, to be the sister who made a difference. But Brian's business never flourished as I hoped, and the money seemed to disappear into a black hole of missed payments and empty promises. Adding to the frustration was the discovery of shared accounts I managed, the family's emergency fund, the joint credit accounts used for utilities, and even the credit card tied to the local caterer. I'd been the gatekeeper, the one reconciling statements, disputing erroneous charges, and making sure payments were made on time. Yet, when it came to recognition, I was invisible. Amid all these documents, I opened a folder I'd labeled Communications. Here were text threads, emails, and notes, reminders sent gently, then more firmly, calls ignored, and messages dismissed. One text from Lisa stood out, a curt, "We'll get to the payment later," sent a month before the party. Another from Brian simply read, "Money's tight, can't help right now." These weren't just words. They were the soundtrack of entitlement, the echoes of a family that expected my support without gratitude or reciprocity. The emotional labor felt just as heavy. I thought about the countless times I'd been the peacemaker, smoothing over conflicts between siblings, mediating disputes without recognition, the phone calls in the middle of the night, the whispered conversations, the moments I swallowed my own pain to keep the family from fracturing further. This labor, unlike the financial, left no paper trail, yet it drained me deeply. David sat beside me, watching quietly. His steady presence was comforting as I laid out every invoice, every unpaid loan, every ignored message. "You've done so much," he said softly. "It's time to stop absorbing all of this alone." I nodded, the knot in my chest tightening but also loosening with resolve. This was not just about the money. It was about setting boundaries, demanding respect, and reclaiming my dignity. The receipts and contracts were more than just numbers. They were proof of the invisible fortress I had built around this family, one that had been breached by their disregard. For now, I needed to be methodical, careful. I gathered these documents, copied the emails, and organized everything to present a clear, undeniable case. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. I wasn't just the family's financial fixer anymore. I was someone who refused to be invisible, someone who would no longer pay the price of their entitlement in silence. As the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across the room, I felt the first flicker of a plan taking shape somewhere between grief and determination. The ledger was ready. My voice was ready too. What came next would change everything, for better or worse. But I knew one thing clearly. I was done being the family's unpaid bank and invisible laborer. It was time to reclaim my life, my boundaries, and my respect. From that morning onward, I began shifting my stance. Quietly, deliberately. I wasn't about to announce it like a battle cry. This was a strategic retreat, a recalibration of the boundaries I'd let erode over the years. The first sign was in the way I handled my phone. Family calls, once answered immediately, started to wait. I'd see Margaret's name flash across the screen and hesitate before picking up, feeling an unexpected tightness in my chest. The urgency that used to compel me to respond instantly was replaced by a cool, measured delay. Sometimes I let calls go to voicemail, returning them hours or even a day later, letting the silence speak volumes without saying a word. Text messages followed the same pattern: requests for money, questions about upcoming events. Even casual check-ins were met with shorter replies. I stopped engaging in the usual back and forth. "I'll get back to you" became my go-to phrase, a polite deflection that kept things at arm's length. I noticed the subtle shift in tone from family members: mild annoyance, puzzled confusion, but no real pressure. Perhaps they thought I was just stressed or caught up with work. That misjudgment worked in my favor. Financially, I made the most significant changes. No more automatic payments for family bills, no more covering deposits or last-minute catering fees. I started scrutinizing shared accounts with a new, almost clinical eye, changing passwords and tightening access where I had previously given free rein. Those joint credit cards linked to family vendors, I canceled or froze them. I informed the caterers and service providers that moving forward, payments would require approval directly from the party responsible, not from me alone. I even sent gentle but firm emails to remind vendors of the new protocols, careful to keep my tone professional and neutral. Organizing family events, once a role I embraced despite the stress, became a line I wouldn't cross again. When the idea of another gathering floated into a group chat, I stayed silent. When Brian or Margaret hinted that I should handle the arrangements, I deflected. "I'm swamped with work right now," I'd say. Or, "Let's see if someone else can take this on." The usual flurry of planning that followed my involvement simply didn't happen. Invitations went out with no input from me, some details left vague or incomplete. It was an experiment in letting go, in watching what happened when I stopped being the family's financial and logistical firefighter. David supported me quietly through it all, never pushing but always present. He understood the complexity, the mix of guilt, relief, and apprehension I was navigating. "You've carried this weight long enough," he reminded me gently one evening as we sat opposite each other over dinner. "Now it's time to see if they step up, or if you need to protect your peace even more." The family noticed the changes, though no one said it outright. Margaret's calls grew shorter, more clipped. Brian tried to charm me with casual conversations, but I kept my answers brief and unfazed. Lisa's texts became less frequent, their usual undercurrents of entitlement fading in the face of my new aloofness. Invitations to dinners and parties, which I had once anticipated, came with awkward pauses or were conspicuously absent. It was as if the family was testing me, trying to figure out whether this withdrawal was temporary or a sign of something more permanent. Throughout these shifts, I maintained a calm exterior. No dramatic outbursts, no confrontations. Inside, I was counting down, preparing to make my most decisive move yet, disputing the payment for the last party. I reviewed the invoices one more time, ensuring every charge was documented, every unpaid reimbursement noted. The final bill was substantial, covering everything from venue costs to catering, entertainment, and decor, the very elements I had managed and financed on my own initiative. In my mind, the dispute wasn't about the money alone. It was a statement, a clear boundary drawn in the sand. By flagging the charge, I was saying, "I am no longer your safety net. I am no longer your invisible benefactor." It was a risk, yes, knowing that family tensions would escalate, that voices would raise and accusations might fly. But after years of quiet sacrifice and silencing my own hurt, I was ready to assert myself in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The calm before the storm was palpable. I could feel the shift in the family's energy even before I sent the dispute through the credit card company. It was a fragile, tense balance, one where silence held more weight than words. In those moments, I was certain of one thing. Whatever happened next, I was no longer willing to play the role they assigned me. The time for subtle withdrawal was ending. The time for standing firm was beginning. The morning light streamed softly through the kitchen window, casting long, pale beams across the cluttered table where I sat with my laptop and stacks of paper. I felt the weight of every number, every receipt, every message printed out or open on the screen. It wasn't just a financial ledger. It was a testament to years of unseen effort, to a story that had been ignored and dismissed by the very people it was meant to serve. I took a deep breath and clicked open the online portal for my credit card. The recent charges for the family party, those thousands of dollars in catering, venue rental, decoration, and entertainment, were all there in glaring detail. The total was more than $12,000, far more than anyone had actually contributed back to me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking steadily, as I carefully typed out the reason for disputing the charges. Dispute reason: unauthorized charge due to breach of trust and exclusion from the event funded. I paused, the words settling coldly in the empty room. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was a declaration. I was formally pushing back against a family that had taken me for granted for too long. Each letter I typed held the weight of years of sacrifice, of late nights balancing budgets, of missed vacations, and of quiet financial rescue missions. But most of all, it was a boundary, a line drawn firmly in the sand. Once the dispute was submitted, I drafted a carefully worded email addressed to my mother and siblings. I wanted my message to be calm, clear, and factual, without the raw emotion that still churned inside me. This was about accountability, not accusation. I began, "Dear Margaret, Brian, Lisa, and family, I am writing to formally inform you that I have disputed the payment for the recent family party charged to my credit card. Given that I was explicitly told I was not welcome at the event I fully funded, and that my children were excluded as well, I cannot in good conscience cover the costs of a gathering that denied me and those closest to me. The invoices I have covered over the years, this party being the latest, are well documented. I have included a comprehensive record of unpaid reimbursements and loans made on behalf of the family. These total tens of thousands of dollars and reflect my ongoing financial support, which has been given with the sincere hope of fostering family unity. However, the exclusion I experienced, coupled with the dismissive attitude I have endured, leaves me no choice but to reconsider my role in the family's financial affairs. I hope this message serves as an invitation to honest reflection and constructive dialogue. Moving forward, I will be evaluating how I engage with family matters to ensure mutual respect and responsibility. Ashley. I attached the detailed spreadsheets, copies of unpaid invoices, and a summary of loans to Brian's business to back up my stance. The act of sending that email felt like stepping onto a stage and announcing a long, simmering truth that no one wanted to hear. My fingers trembled slightly as I hit send, but beneath the anxiety was a fierce sense of ownership over my own boundaries. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed with incoming messages and missed calls, Margaret's name flashing repeatedly on the screen. My heart beat faster, but I didn't answer. I wanted to keep a calm head, not react impulsively. The messages started. Ashley, please reconsider. This isn't the time. We can talk this through. Don't make this permanent. You're hurting the family. I read them all but didn't respond. I was not about to let guilt or pressure dictate my actions anymore. Not after all this time. This dispute was not just about money. It was about self-respect and reclaiming control. The phone rang again. This time I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, it was Margaret's voice, strained and pleading. Ashley, don't tell me this is true. Please, we can fix this. Fix this? I thought bitterly. How do you fix years of invisibility, of overlooked sacrifices, of being told you're not welcome at your own party? I sat back, the room suddenly feeling both too small and too vast. The silence that followed was heavy, but inside me, a new resolve was building. This dispute was just the beginning of a reckoning, a necessary upheaval in a family dynamic that had long been out of balance. I wasn't naive. I knew this move would escalate tensions, spark arguments, and possibly fracture the family further, but it was a step I had to take for myself. No longer would I be the invisible banker, the silent supporter, the dismissed daughter. The ledger was now public, and the debts owed to me were being acknowledged. As I closed my laptop, I felt an odd mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. The phone continued to buzz with notifications, unanswered and ignored. The storm was coming, But this time, I was ready to stand firm in the eye of it. The phone didn't stop ringing. At first, it was a flicker of notifications, but soon my screen was lit up with calls and messages from every corner of the Gray family. Margaret's name appeared over and over, her voice on my voicemail a mix of disbelief and desperation. "Ashley, please, don't tell me this is true. We can fix this. Just talk to me." Her words felt like a strange echo of the cold rejection she'd delivered at the party, now twisted into frantic pleading. It was almost surreal to watch the dynamic flip so quickly, from outright dismissal to urgent attempts at damage control. Brian was next to explode onto the scene, but not with apologies. His texts came fast and furious, a mix of denial and anger, the tone shifting from shocked to aggressive within minutes. "This can't be happening," he wrote. "You're crazy if you think we're just going to let you walk away from everything. This is family." There was blame, too. Thinly veiled accusations that I was overreacting, being unreasonable, even selfish. I could almost hear his voice in the words, the familiar charm replaced by frustration and a hint of panic. Lisa's messages followed, less direct, but equally charged with guilt-tripping undertones. "Ashley, we all love you," one text read. "It hurts to see you do this. Please think about what you're risking." Yet beneath that veneer of concern, there was an unmistakable note of manipulation, as if my refusal to continue funding the family was a betrayal rather than a boundary. Despite the emotional turmoil their words stirred, I held firm. David sat beside me, his quiet presence a grounding force amid the storm. He'd warned me about this fallout, and now it was unfolding exactly as he'd predicted. But he also reminded me why I had to stand my ground. "They're scared because you stopped being their safety net," he said softly. "You're not just disputing a bill, you're challenging their whole way of taking you for granted." The family's scramble to cover the disputed charges intensified quickly. I overheard through the grapevine that Margaret was calling vendors, trying to reverse payments, promising that reimbursements would come soon. Brian was frantically reaching out to friends and business contacts, desperate to patch the financial hole that his sister had suddenly exposed. Even family friends, previously unaware of the undercurrents, started asking questions, sensing the unusual tension creeping into what should have been a joyful gathering. The group texts became battlegrounds. Messages flew back and forth, filled with accusations, excuses, and desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative. "Ashley, this is tearing us apart," one relative pleaded. "Can we not find a way to move past this?" But the wounds ran too deep. The ledger of debts and dismissals too long ignored for easy reconciliation. Margaret's tone shifted from authoritative matriarch to someone fraying at the edges. In one message she wrote, "I never wanted it to come to this, but you've left me no choice." It was a veiled threat, suggesting consequences beyond just the financial. But I wasn't intimidated. Years of being brushed aside had hardened me, and now the power dynamics were tilting. Calls kept coming, some from siblings, others from cousins and even distant relatives, each with their own brand of guilt or anger. Some tried to bargain, offering partial repayments or promises of change, while others simply needed an explanation. Stunned that I had finally drawn a line, I responded sparingly, careful to keep my words measured and clear. This wasn't about rehashing old wounds or begging for forgiveness. It was about setting firm boundaries and demanding accountability. Through it all, David was my anchor. He helped me sift through the flood of messages, advising when to respond and when to hold back. "Don't get pulled into their drama," he cautioned. "Keep your focus on what you need." His pragmatic support helped me maintain the calm exterior I needed, even as inside I felt the familiar churn of hurt and anger. The family's scramble revealed just how dependent they'd become on my quiet generosity, the financial cushions I'd put in place, the unpaid debts they'd silently accepted. Now, those cushions were gone, and panic rippled through their carefully maintained facade of unity. Invitations to future events started to dwindle. Conversations became strained, and the once solid image of the Gray family began to fracture in plain sight. Yet, amid the chaos, I felt an unexpected clarity. This upheaval was painful, yes, but it was also a reckoning long overdue. The frantic calls, the desperate texts, the guilt and anger, They were all signs that my refusal to be invisible anymore was forcing everyone to confront a truth they'd ignored for too long. The phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see a new message from Margaret. "Please, Ashley, let's find a way to heal this. We need you, more than you realize." I sat with those words, feeling the weight of years of rejection and sacrifice pressing against the fragile hope buried beneath them. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath, knowing that whatever came next would require the strength I'd been gathering quietly, the resolve to stand firm even when the family's voice grew loud and pleading. The storm was far from over, and I was ready to weather it. The aftermath of my dispute rippled through the Gray family like a shockwave, unsettling the delicate balance they'd maintained for years. Almost overnight, the consequences cascaded, each one revealing just how deeply intertwined my financial support was with their everyday lives, and how fragile that web had become once I stepped away. Almost immediately, vendors who had long been patient began sending stern reminders, their polite emails turning into urgent calls. The caterers for the party, the florist, the DJ, each one reached out demanding payment, referencing contracts and deadlines. I knew some had already started threatening collections, a nightmare I'd long fought to avoid by personally smoothing over past delays. Now, with the disputed charge hanging like a dark cloud, those calls landed squarely on the family's doorstep. I could almost hear Margaret's hurried explanations and frantic promises to settle accounts that were suddenly past due. Brian's business partners and suppliers were next caught in the ripple. Without the usual infusions of cash I'd quietly provided or helped manage, questions arose, doubts cast on his ability to meet financial commitments. Whispers started circulating, friends and associates expressing concern over shaky funding. Brian's assured charm faltered under the weight of mounting pressure, his denials failing to mask the reality that his financial safety net had been yanked away. I knew this storm would not just hammer his business, but strain his carefully crafted image of success. Social invitations, once frequent and eagerly anticipated, began to dwindle. The Gray family's social circle, tightly knit and highly image-conscious, reacted swiftly to the tension. Events I used to be asked to attend, or to organize, were suddenly scheduled with little notice or without my involvement. The subtle sidelining felt like a second exile, this time outside the family's social fabric. Even distant relatives and close family friends who once relied on my mediation and support drifted away, unwilling to wade into the unfolding conflict. But it wasn't just the financial and social fallout. The family dynamics shifted into overdrive, as if the denial and dismissal of years of my support had suddenly been exposed under a harsh spotlight. Group texts became battlefields. Messages flew back and forth, saturated with frustration, accusation, and guilt. "Ashley, this is tearing us apart," one distant cousin pleaded. "Can we find a way forward?" But the wounds ran deep, and no easy bridge could span the gulf opened by years of invisible labor meeting explicit rejection. Margaret, who had always wielded authority with unyielding force, seemed to falter. Her text messages, once commanding and dismissive, now carried undertones of desperation. "I never wanted it to come to this," she wrote. "But you've left me no choice." That phrase felt heavy with unspoken threats, a suggestion that consequences beyond financial repercussions might follow. But years of dismissal had steeled me. I wasn't intimidated by veiled warnings. The power dynamics were tipping, and for the first time, I held firm ground. Calls flooded in, some from siblings, others from cousins and even distant relatives, each conversation peeling back layers of denial, anger, or sorrow. Some tried bargaining, offering partial payments or vague promises of future change, but their words rang hollow to me. Others sought explanations, stunned that I had finally drawn a boundary so clearly. My replies were measured, carefully crafted to assert my position without igniting further conflict. This wasn't about revisiting old wounds. It was about holding firm to the respect and accountability I deserved. David was my anchor throughout this storm. He sifted through the barrage of messages with me, advising when to respond and when to step back. "Don't let them drag you into chaos," he cautioned. "Remember why you're standing your ground." His calm presence was a balm for the swelling tide of emotions inside me. helping me maintain the composed front I needed, even as the familiar churn of hurt and frustration raged beneath. The scramble to cover the disputed charges exposed just how reliant the family had become on my quiet generosity. The safety nets I'd cast, unpaid debts, informal loans, shared accounts, were now fraying, revealing a precarious foundation propped up by my goodwill. Invitations to upcoming family events, once so routine, now came sporadically or with subtle exclusions. Conversations were strained, and the polished image of the Gray family began to crack, fractures becoming visible to outsiders who had once admired our cohesion. Yet amid the chaos, a strange clarity emerged for me. This upheaval, as painful as it was, forced the family to confront a truth they had long ignored: my refusal to continue being invisible, to silently absorb their entitlement, was shaking the very core of what they'd taken for granted. Their frantic calls, desperate texts, and thinly veiled pleas underscored the depth of their dependence and their fear of losing me. One message from Margaret summed up the complicated emotions swirling beneath the surface. "Please, Ashley, let's find a way to heal. We need you more than you realize." I held those words in my hands like fragile glass, hope mingling with the weight of years of neglect and rejection. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I breathed deeply, bracing myself for whatever came next, knowing the road ahead would require patience, strength, and unshakable resolve. This was far from over. The storm had only just begun. Yet within the tempest, I found a fierce determination blooming. The knowledge that standing firm in the face of family upheaval was the first step toward reclaiming my dignity and rewriting the rules of belonging on my own terms. The moment I decided to stop being the family's invisible bank and stepping stone was the moment everything shifted, not just in how they saw me, but how I saw myself. The weeks following the disputed bill and the flood of frantic calls, guilt-driven texts, and veiled threats were some of the most emotionally exhausting periods I'd ever faced. But amidst the chaos, I found a surprising clarity. This was no longer just about money or acknowledgement. It was about establishing real boundaries, about demanding respect and accountability that I had long been denied. I realized that if I was going to survive this family fallout, I had to be clear and unwavering about what I was willing to accept moving forward. So, I started laying down terms for any future contact. It wasn't a list of demands born from anger or revenge. It was a set of principles grounded in self-respect and fairness. First, respect. I refused to engage with any conversation or gathering where I was dismissed or disrespected. No more silent endurance of cold shoulders or whispered exclusions. If I was to be part of this family, or any part of it, I needed to be seen and treated as an equal, not just the person who footed the bills or cleaned up the messes. This meant calling out dismissive comments or ignoring invitations to events where my presence was conditional or unwanted. Second, transparency. I insisted on open and honest communication, especially about finances or shared responsibilities. No more vague promises or last-minute requests. Everyone who benefited from shared expenses would need to be upfront about their commitments and hold themselves accountable. If that meant having uncomfortable conversations about money, so be it. I could no longer carry the burden alone or be the family's invisible accountant. Third, shared responsibility. I made it clear that from here on out, I would only contribute what was agreed upon and fair, and I expected others to do the same. I would no longer cover the shortfalls, the accidental missed payments, or the silent debts. If they wanted my support, they had to earn it in ways that went beyond financial dependence. They had to show genuine respect and effort. In setting these boundaries, I also prioritized my immediate family, David and our children. They were my anchor and my sanctuary. Their emotional well-being and stability became my compass in navigating the storm. I invested my time and energy in nurturing a home where unconditional love and respect prevailed, where burdens were shared equally, and where I was not invisible but deeply valued. With David's unwavering support, we talked openly about what this shift meant for us and for our relationship with the Gray family. We agreed that we would protect our children from the toxic dynamics as much as possible, allowing them to have relationships on their own terms, but never at the expense of their self-worth or safety. David reminded me often that family isn't just about blood or obligation. It's about mutual care and respect, something I had every right to demand. I also began to build a circle of support beyond my biological family. Friends who had witnessed the dysfunction firsthand stepped up, offering empathy and strength. I sought out new connections grounded in honesty and reciprocity, relationships where demands weren't one-sided, and where my voice mattered. This widening community became a vital part of my healing and empowerment. Despite the pain and the fractures, I chose not to close the door completely on the Gray family. Instead, I left it ajar, with clear terms that anyone who wanted to cross the threshold had to respect. There would be no going back to the silent suffering or the invisible labor. If the family wanted me and wanted to be part of my life, they had to meet me where I stood, firm, resolute, and unafraid to protect my dignity. This wasn't about punishment or bitterness. It was about reclaiming my narrative and rewriting the rules of what family meant to me. I was no longer willing to be an invisible fixture or a financial safety net for people who refused to see my worth. I was done sacrificing my peace and well-being for a status that felt conditional and fragile. The journey ahead was uncertain. I knew there would be resistance, heartbreak, and moments of loneliness. But I also knew that by setting these boundaries, I was opening the door to a life where my contributions were honored, my presence valued, and my dignity preserved. In that space of clarity and self-respect, I found a new kind of peace, one that didn't depend on others' acceptance, but on the firm foundation I built for myself and my family.